Welcome, Exile. I'm sure you're pretty excited recently with the news about Path of Exile 2. Well, in celebration, I've created the Path of Exile Iceberg. Not to be confused with a map, no. Anyways, this whole iceberg right here contains exactly 100 entries spread evenly across 5 layers, each themed for a progression point in the game. The entries here range from many facets of the game, including some game facts, the company behind it, content creators, memes, and more. I wanted this iceberg to serve as an introductory point for new players that is not only interested in the game, but also wanting to know the general culture surrounding it. Like many icebergs, we go from the top with well-known facts to the bottom with lesser-known facts. But to add to it, there are also going to be some entries that are deemed as controversial to some degree. So we also got least controversial at the top to most controversial at the bottom. Because as much as I like this game, there are some flaws that we do need to acknowledge. But with that being said, are you still saying Exile? Then let's dive.
Still alive, are we?
Chris Wilson. Well, I had to give the headliner to the main face of the game after all. So, Chris Wilson from Grinding Gear Games.
Hi, I'm Chris Wilson from Grinding Gear Games.
Hi, I'm Chris Wilson from Grinding Gear Games.
Hi, I'm Chris Wilson from Grinding Gear Games.
He is one of the founders of the company who works as CEO and Managing Director. He is the one mainly seen among several presentations and interviews divulging information of new game content and insight of the company. He and his co-founders in 2006 desired heavily for the next ARPG and decided to not wait any longer and started GDG right there and then and developed Path of Exile as we see it today. Chris always aims to be involved with the community the best that he can, even in situations where backlash is high, as he is willing to be the punching bag. As dedicated as he is, he can be quite stubborn with the decision he makes, which results in some negative takes from the player base and even spawning some memes as a result. In the end, however, he does what he believes is best for the game, and I doubt he's doing it out of spite. As innovative as Path of Exile is, someone has got to be there to make the tough decisions, and Chris Wilson is willing to lead the charge.
Well, that feels amazing.
Tabula Rasa. This here's a very sought-after unique at leak start for its 6-linked wide sockets, especially when leveling more than one character. It saves you the headaches of constantly finding new gear with the right colors and links, thus making your leveling experience more smooth and flexible. Granted, there is no defense or other modifiers, so for newer players out there, do be careful when using this. Personally, I'm a fan of the older design that looks like a t-shirt, because it does not look lore friendly, and that's why I love it so much. Zizaran. Zizaran is a well-known content creator covering Path of Exile and ARPGs since October 2015. His content is very community-focused, with teaching viewers the ins and outs of PoE through league start guides, his PoE University series, covering PoE news, etc. He's also a very big fan of playing hardcore, which inevitably showcases him how he died in almost every run, which is likely why he always ends his videos with,
"Try to die less than I do."
His general helpful and friendly nature would also net him the position as ambassador on Twitch's Safety Council. And lastly, he is known for running a racing event called the Gauntlet that takes place near the end of almost every league. In it, players compete in a solo cell phone hardcore environment to complete objectives to earn various prizes like cash, MTX, PC parts, gift cards, and so on. All the while having to deal with special difficulty modifiers, like this recent one right here. Yeah, I'm not a hardcore gamer enough for that. Skill Tree Quitters. I'm sure you've probably been there when this happened. After killing Hillock and leveling up, you earn your first skill point and open up the menu to allocate it. What do you see? A massive web of passive skills that likely left you in shock. At that point, the absolute size of it might have scared off new players from continuing on. Most recent example I've witnessed was with Vishoujo's Zentrea, as seen here.
And that is only one layer.
Although she did go as far as completing the Dweller of the Deep quest, this moment is one of many examples new players can face and feel overwhelmed as a result. And trust me, we've all been there. Just imagine how new players would react to the Atlas passive skill tree, because dear God. Methyl. Methyl, or methylification, is another notable content creator who is very dedicated to PoE since closed beta. A lot of his content focuses on making many ridiculous builds and documenting his findings. His extensive knowledge of the game and experimentation with builds over the years heavily influences the metagame like crazy. If there's a stupid idea for a build, he has likely done it, and made it work. So if you want to know what a meme build is like that actually works, he's the guy you go to. All while having a down-to-earth, laid-back vibe to his videos and streams, and he does track running and rock climbing. Pretty giga Chad. Visual clutter. Especially more in recent times, Path of Exile has been known for having a lot of visual clutter that makes it difficult to ascertain at any given moment. The following list includes your own MTX, the skills that you use, many types of enemies, the amount of enemies, mods on said enemies, many moves of said enemies, loot on the floor, high saturated locations, league mechanic overlap, and much more. I'm sure DG is doing what they can to make any combat encounter distinct in its visuals, but then again, we're making it worse for ourselves anyways.
The touch of God!
This is referring to the High Templar Dominus, who is the main guy that sentenced you to raid class as an exile. He becomes the boss that you fight against in Act 3, and one of his moves involves him having to say the iconic line,
The touch of God!
And slamming his fist into the ground, resulting in one hit for the uninitiated. For a good while in the earlier years, Dominus was considered to be the final boss of the game, and as such, we've heard his iconic line many times over, and to some of us, probably got PTSD because of getting a one-shot all the time. Quinn69. Oh god, do I have to talk about him? Okay, yes, he is a prominent Twitch streamer that reaches over 10k views on average, and he is known for playing Path of Exile. But just through osmosis, he just exudes this hardcore god gamer vibe, and yet he keeps dying a lot. People say it's an act. I don't know. I don't watch him. If you like that style of entertainment, that's fine. It just isn't for me. I mean, he's got to be doing something right if he's got that big of a following, so yeah, guys, it's okay. I don't actually hate him. Anyways, Headhunter. By far, Headhunter is the most iconic, unique item in the entire game. Aside from having life, attributes, and increased damage to rares, being able to steal all modifiers from a rare monster for a solid minute makes this item highly desired, at least to casual players. For high-end players, feelings are usually mixed, as having Headhunter can make the game boring, or it just wasn't the same as before, as it did get indirectly nerfed some time ago. It went from gating modifiers that can stack to only one instance of each modifier at any given time, but with a longer duration. Nowadays, players are more interested in Mage Blood, and it shows, with the price history being much higher and consistent compared to Headhunter. But nonetheless, the belt still has its uses, and its legacy cannot be forgotten. Ziggy D. Yeah, I realize I'm including a lot of content creators on this list, but it's good that we cover our bases, as Ziggy D got his start covering Diablo 3, but when Path of Exile came along during closed beta, he covered a lot of aspects of the game like beginner's guides, crafting, patch notes, builds, and more. He was very much an earlier adopter to Path of Exile, and as a result of his dedication, he is the one that does the special Q&A segments with Chris Wilson during League reveals. Diablo Refugees. This is the community's way of describing new players who previously enjoyed the Diablo franchise but was turned away from it for one reason or another, likely due to Immortal being so cash grabby and probably Diablo 4 just not delivering up to the hype. So now they're in the search of wanting more out of their ARPGs. And rest assured, Path of Exile has got you covered. Path of Building. If you are aware how overwhelming that PoE is going to be, you've likely seen guides making use of this software. As the name implies, Path of Building is what allows you to plan your build ahead of time with setting up the passive skill tree, gem links, gear, and doing stat calculations. It is also capable of importing and exporting builds. For example, if you want to take a closer look at a build on PoE.Ninja, you can press the button to copy the code, and you can import it straight into the program, and you can have a closer look at how everything clicks. Do take calculations like DPS with a grain of salt, unless you or someone else has done the math correctly, because some skill interactions aren't always easy to calculate. Tai Killer. Well known in the community as a prominent racer and speedrunner, Tai Killer first got started right when version 1.0 came out on October 2013. He initially didn't click with the game with how confusing it was. However, years later when Breach was about to launch, his friend, which funny enough is named Chris, got him back into the game and was floored with the way he progressed to the endgame. It was then he vowed to level faster one day. When Fall of Oriath was in beta, he took notes of a run by Den and Doom and used it as a foundation to learn how to race. From there, his skills improved and participated in many community racing events. The biggest ones, of course, was the finals at ExileCon 2019 and 2023. While he only got 4th place and 3rd place respectively, getting to the finals in the first place is no easy feat, which is still commendable for Tai and the other racers involved. Einhar Frey. This character's entire existence is a meme, just straight up. First introduced during Bestiary League, Einhar the Beastmaster is a very eccentric NPC with a passion for capturing beasts, and the dialogue he spouts are just gold.
Ready, Exile? It is time to hunt! Haha! You are captured, stupid beast!
But by far, my favorite line that he says is this.
What? Do you not have nets, Exile?
This line actually has two meanings behind it. Firstly, in Bestiary League, the main way you had to interact with the league mechanic was to manually throw nets at beasts when it has little life left. It was a clunky mechanic. So now, Einhar joins you to catch specific beasts, and then he throws the nets instead. But the second meaning is a jab at Blizzard in reference to the Diablo Immortal reveal, when the presenter said the line,
Do you guys not have phones?
Yeah, you guys all have phones, right?
and no, this isn't the last time GGG has done this, as you will hear later. Neversink. As a new player, you'll eventually get to the point of items on the ground taking up too much screen space and only want relevant items. This is where you need an item filter, and you're likely pointed towards a website called Filterblade. And this is all thanks to Neversink. Much like most other players, Neversink played the heck out of Diablo 2, and then by word of mouth, tried out Path of Exile, and he gradually got hooked. By the time 2.0 beta came around where it introduced item filters, he knew he was going to be spending too much time optimizing it, given by his developer background. So he did. From there, he and his friends, Topnak and Haggis, created Filterblade as we see it today, with the goal of filters to be intuitive, customizable, visualize why certain items are highlighted, and to save and share. This man does, however, run a Patreon to keep the servers running, and he really deserves it, as item filters these days are honestly required in my opinion, so definitely show your support to Neversink. On the topic of item filters, sound packs. One of the functions item filters can do is to play a sound whenever a certain item drops. If you're using Filterblade, the sound selection can range from simple default sounds, NPC voice lines,
The Mirror of Kalandra.
or custom-made packs by the community.
Hey, over here, check this out.
Of course, you have the option to create your own meme-filled sound pack yourself. For me, I create a Michael Rosen sound pack.
Fantastic. Nice.
It has over 80 sounds. I'm not joking. Bex. Bex is the marketing manager and community lead over at Grinding Gear Games. She gets involved in the community by having to do interviews with notable content creators, and most notably through her Twitter, having to sprinkle bits of information during spoiler season of an upcoming league. She can also sometimes be cryptic as well, especially with her own divination card called Cursed Words. Reddit user TacoCat took all known words, including the hidden words in the art, and discovered an anagram that reads, "Would you hide when Krilson, master fisherman of Winding Pier fame, found you decoding how to catch fish?" I'll explain what that means later. Before I go to the next entry, I have an update on Bex. While I'm making this video on August 3rd, 2023, Bex has posted a tweet saying that she is officially leaving Grinding Gear Games. This was very surprising since this was almost a week after ExileCon 2023. But she has really done a lot over the past 10 years with the way that she interacts with the community. And I find that ExileCon 2023 is the perfect swan song for her career at Grinding Gear Games. So thank you very much, Bex, and I hope that your next chapter is amazing. Calandra. This is a name that is often recognized through the most expensive currency in the game called the Mirror of Calandra, which allows you to copy any non-unique, non-corrupted item. Because of its rarity and function, it became a well-known status symbol amongst players and for the design of the main logo. So for a while, we had nothing solidified within the lore on this iconic piece of currency, until the Lake of Calandra League. And if some of you are shuddering by me mentioning it, I'm going to be talking about it more in later entries. In this league, we finally get to see Calandra, a being who possesses a body of an owl and the head of a human. In her story, Calandra discovered the lake during primordial time out of curiosity. Upon entering the lake, she couldn't leave. She attempted to leave many times, but always ended up back at the lake with memories outside of the lake completely wiped. All that she can do now is just observe the outside world, and to do rare interaction to those that visited. Those that did visit were free to leave, including us exiles. There was hope, however, when the Order of the Jinn found Calandra and made a vow to free her. But upon uncovering the truth, the scrolls and scribes that read it were burned. So yeah, Calandra can't catch a break, especially after the poor reception from many things surrounding this league, which again, I'll talk about later. If you want to know more about the lore and theory on this character, I recommend watching Kitten Cat Noodle's video on the subject and even more of her videos if you're invested in the lore of Path of Exile. Vendor recipes. Path of Exile's way of material exchange is more varied than the traditional gold you receive in other ARPGs. In Path of Exile, you have the vendor recipe system, where you get multiple kinds of currency based on the state of the item or in combination with other items when selling. Knowing about the recipes, especially the basic ones, is crucial when starting a new league, as you'll need many currencies for all sorts of crafting. But currency isn't the only thing you can get. You can also do crafting and item production through vendor recipes as well. Some examples include an iron ring with a blue gem gives you a sapphire ring, a full unidentified rare set with item levels between 60 and 74 gives you 2 chaos orbs, and a normal caster weapon with gems that totals to at least 40% in quality with the cold tag gives you a magic weapon with +1 to level of all cold spell skill gems. There is a lot more recipes that you can discover, but if you're lazy like most of us, I recommend you take a look at the PoE wiki to see the full list. Diablo 2 inspired content. It's no surprise that Path of Exile was built off the DNA of Diablo 2. Even though PoE aims to do its own thing, there are some pieces of content that is a bit on the nose in reference to Diablo 2. For skill gems, Spectral Helix functions similarly to the Paladin's Blessed Hammer, Eye of Winter is the Sorcerer's Frozen Orb, and Cyclone is Barbarian's Whirlwind. Even some lead mechanics were formed from Diablo 2 with Gwendolyn in Expedition, with the gambling mechanic. I'm sure there are more obvious nods to Diablo 2, and I'm sure it's not going to be the last.
The flame of hope may flicker, but it cannot be extinguished.
Vol or no balls. For the uninitiated, a Vol Orb corrupts an item to change its properties unpredictably and in most cases break your item, as modifying it afterwards becomes more costly. However, the best outcome from it would be to get a Vol Implicit, a special modifier that is exclusive to corrupting items. Some of the best ones are on body armors, which can grant additional levels to gems, plus 1% to all maximum resistances, reduce damage taken, and more. As for the phrase Vol or no balls, this is one of the early PoE phrases in the community that dares you to use a Vol Orb on one of your items, or you got no balls to do it. The joke, of course, you wouldn't do it since it's way too risky, unless you have a backup item. Flask Piano. This is the simple act of pressing your flask keys in sequence as if you're playing the piano. This was a default action for players for a long time and still is to an extent.
Help.
This repetitive button mashing is not only brain dead, but could also be potentially strenuous and cause injury. This was something that was addressed later during the Expedition League, where in Stealing Orbs, make it so that the effect happens based on certain conditions, and in Killing Orbs that gives increased effect, but you don't gain charges while it's in effect. To say if this worked? It kinda did. But what happened during Expedition League in general? That's a toughie, and you'll know why later. Exile Crimes. Have you bothered to check why the exiles are being exiled? Well, let's go down the list. The witch was ostracized by the villagers for her practice in the elemental and dark arts. As such, they burned her house down and drove her away from the village. But she got even with having to destroy the village, and the children were sent to daycare. The Shadow was a hired killer to assassinate someone important in Orioth. When he spoke too proudly to his members of the Guild of the Night of his achievement, he was ratted out and sent to Rayclast. The Ranger was a loner just living off the land by hunting. But to the Oriothans, they see this as poaching, and now the Ranger hunts on Rayclast. The Duelist was a famous gladiator in Theopolis who had such an inflated ego that when a noble insults him, the noble was killed and the Duelist was sent to Rayclast. The Marauder, a cavalry warrior, was enslaved by the Oriothans. After 3 years, he had enough and rebelled against his masters, thus sending him to Rayclast and free from slavery. The Templar was part of a faction called the Order of the Templar, whose more notable members were responsible for the cataclysm in Rayclast's past. Upon having visions of this event, the Templar sought out answers from his brethren, only then to be silenced and labeled as a heretic. Now the Templar sets foot onto Rayclast to seek the truth. And finally, the Scion, who was born in a family of corrupt nobles. For political reasons, the Scion was forced into an arranged marriage for someone she had no romantic interest in. Then, on that wedding night, she promptly killed her husband. Now she walks Rayclast in a new light that isn't barred by her upbringing. Gamer for Life. Gamer for Life is a YouTube channel centered on highlight compilations of Path of Exile. The creator started in July of 2015 with a few different gaming videos, but quickly jumped over to Path of Exile to show off his own personal moments and guides. Then in April of 2017, he posted a video to offer anybody that would like to have a clip submitted to his channel for future compilations. And from there, he's been doing highlights ever since, showing off the many facets of Path of Exile. Deaths in hardcore, epic loot drops, blessed RNG crafting, glitches, and more. 5 ways. No, this doesn't mean anything sexual, but this refers to the Legion mechanic. As you encounter timeless monoliths and collect splinters, you'll eventually create emblems, which can then be used in your map device. You can only start with 4 out of the 5 emblems, but upon completing the encounter, you'll unlock a 5th slot in your map device, which will allow you to do all 5 emblems, hence why it's called a 5-way. This was a good way to earn a lot of XP, but as of 3.22, the XP increase was nerfed, making other options now more competitive. This is a buff. Pre-league hype for Path of Exile is always an exciting time, for better or for worse, and it's often expressed through reading the patch notes. But we just need that extra clarification to know if that something was buffed. Citing to the 2.4 Atlas of Worlds patch notes, there are a few lines showing numerical changes on some gems, with a statement ending with, "This is a buff," in italics. This line stuck out so much that the player base uses this meme no matter what the context is. But you know what? Having to deal with nerfs on a league-by-league basis, we need some form of copium with this meme. League Start cosplays. As part of the ritual for League Start, Twitch streamers can opt in and doing cosplay for viewers to see, sometimes relating to the league itself. One of the examples of this, of course, is Mathil as seen here. It's often amusing to see how creative the streamer can get with whatever materials they have lying around. While I'm at it, I do want to acknowledge the effort of cosplays over at ExileCon, showing off the various NPCs and even some of them that are wearing well-known unique items. Very well done, guys. Ward. This is a rather odd defense mechanic in the game right now. For the longest time, we are given 3 known defense types: armor for physical reduction, evasion rating to evade attacks, and energy shield that protects your life in most cases. But what about ward? This is the 4th defense type that was included in the Expedition League, where you can get items that are exclusive to that mechanic with this defense type. Ward reduces the damage taken from a hit equal to that amount of ward, goes on cooldown for 4 seconds, and instantly returns back. The best that I could see to make this viable is pairing it up with evasion, but even then, the only way to scale ward is through the gear itself, or even on some other gear that has a special modifier like increased global defenses. So there sadly is no other option, like no passive skills, keystones, none of that stuff. Hopefully GGG will explore ward further one day. Essence Drain Contagion Trickster. For multiple leagues, Essence Drain Contagion Trickster was a popular choice for league start builds with how well the 2 skills interact with each other. How it works is that you place Contagion on the enemy and following it up with Essence Drain. The effect of Contagion will take the chaos damage of Essence Drain and spread it to nearby enemies, giving it a smooth playstyle. This league starter was popularized by Zizaran to the point of just becoming a meme. But by version 3.17, he finally killed the meme, as Essence Drain Contagion Trickster is now seen as okay compared to other builds.
No longer.
And as of 3.19, the Trickster no longer has ascendancy passive skills relating to chaos or damage over time. Enki's Archwitch. This is a very historical build within Path of Exile that dates back to December of 2014 in the forums. This build is very simple. You cast Arc and it just easily chains and kill mobs. Henceforth an enticing choice for new players, and it's still being updated to this day. How viable it is right now, I can't really say, as it has been a while for me, but in the latest edited post in the forums, Enki states that the current setup isn't all that doable and is right now experimenting with different lightning spells. And if you wanted to play Arc that badly, Hierophant is the much better option according to PoE.Ninja. So the legacy of Enki's Archwitch would seem to be coming to an end, and I'm kinda sad, honestly. But let's be thankful that it did exist in the first place, as it did introduce new players to the game with a simple build. Pizza Totems. This is referring to the skill Flame Blast, a channeling skill that creates a glowing ring of fire that explodes. The graphic of Flame Blast, with its bright orange outline, reminds us too much of pizza. Add in the convenience of totems, because standing still yourself is a death sentence, and you got Pizza Totems. This is a build that I personally messed with dating back to Bestiary League, and it was amusing and it got the job done through the campaign, but I have not tested it in maps. Nowadays, there are new things to bring it up to snuff, as demonstrated by Captain Lance in a recent video. But then again, this is totems we're talking about, and not everyone can resonate with that playstyle. But hey, we all like pizza, don't we? Onigoroshi. This is a rather ridiculous sword, both in its stats and how to get it. The signature stats in this sword includes physical damage scaling per level, crit chance, the Her Embrace buff on Ignite, where you cannot be stunned, physical as extra fire, unaffected by burning ground, immune to freeze, chill, and ignite, and 20% increased attack, cast, and movement speed. You'll also take fire damage per second per level while in Her Embrace, and lastly, it's fully linked with 6 sockets and you need to use both hands. And she talks. So where in the heck do you get this? Well, you need to kill Uberhillik without leaving the Twilight Strand, which involves creating multiple characters and rotating between them to level them up until finally Uberhillik spawns. Do I recommend doing this? No. You'll lose like 8 to 10 hours on average by doing this. You're probably better off having to get a fishing rod. Wait, fishing? Let's talk about that. Fishing and Boat League. There is quite the fascination of fishing and boats in Path of Exile that is littered with Easter eggs, joke items, and all things nautical themed. The earliest information on anything fishing related likely started with open beta in 2013. Players could encounter a very rare albino roa which drops a feather, like it can be used as bait. Players can get fishing rods while wearing Fairgrave's tricorn, or by extreme chances, you'll meet with Krilson, master fisherman of Winding Pier fame. And yes, it is who you think it is. This is what I was referring to earlier on the Beck's Cursed Words anagram. Now there is more to the fishing Easter egg, mostly through divination cards, but what about the idea of a boat league? That again is likely because of the fishing Easter eggs, but the direct connection I can think of was the game originally had a character select screen taking place on a boat. There could be some other sources on social media that keeps teasing about the idea of boat league, but we all know that'll never happen. Instead, let's have Jagex do that idea and see how well that turns out.
This will not be an escape.
This is one of the lines spoken by the Maven, one of the endgame pinnacle bosses. What might send shivers down your spine with this quote is that it's a line spoken when she starts the memory game. She'll teleport to the center and begin highlighting 3 different sections of the arena, and you are to repeat the sequence while avoiding the charge up blast. Stepping on the wrong section will accelerate the charge up. If you complete the memory game while standing in it, or the arena gets filled, you basically get one shot. And it gets progressively worse. You start with 3 sections to memorize, going up to 6 with rotating lightning beams in the final phase. From my personal experience with her debut in 3.13, I had to fight her while I was bedridden while using a wireless keyboard and a mouse, and I lost all of my portals. But in my second attempt, I only died 4 times. So don't be like me when you're recovering from ankle surgery to fight the Maven with wireless peripherals. It's just bad. Molten Strike nerfs. This one oddly fascinates me. Whenever patch notes are imminent, the first meme that is said by people is Molten Strike is nerfed/removed. But why? Well, it could be that Molten Strike was genuinely a good skill back in the day. The first instance of his downfall that I could find started in 3.5, with helmet enchantments decreasing the amount of projectiles by 1. In 3.7, you have to actually hit the enemy to produce the projectiles, and the projectiles themselves deal 50% less damage. In 3.9, the point-blank keystone went from 50 to 30% more damage, an indirect nerf to Molten Strike. And in 3.11, the Wildfire Jewel became almost useless to the point of being deleted in 3.20. However, in the most recent league, 3.21, the change to Vengeance Cascade has made Molten Strike more appealing to use again, and in builds that's outside of the Juggernaut Ascendancy. But if history repeats itself, we're just going to say this again out of habit. Incoming Molten Strike nerf. Demigod items. These are a special collection of items that are rewarded to the top players from various races throughout the years. The first one being Demigod's Presence in closed beta, to the more recent one, Demigod's Authority in 3.12. Sadly, with all the races, characters are migrated to Standard along with those items. But they do have a second life over in Standard as they are limited items, making it highly sought after for collectors. Endless Delve. On the topic of races, there is a special subset of races where you can start outside of regular areas with special items and vendors to achieve a particular objective. In this case of Endless Delve, you start in solo self-found at the Azurite Mine encampment with unique items only found in this race, along with Lily Roth to buy gems with 1 scroll each, and the Ascension Altar to use at appropriate levels. And you begin delving at no sulfite cost with the nodes properly scaled starting at level 1, and you can go as far as you can. This became a really good racing event in the past 2 to 3 years, running 3 times in total. It's so good, some players often think that why can't delving be an alternate way to level a character to the endgame? But that is a can of worms for another entry most likely. Infinite Heist. Not to be confused with the Endless Heist race, this was a money-making strategy that involves you doing infinite contracts even before getting into maps. By the time you reach the mid-60s, you can start running contracts, mainly lockpicking contracts, and earn a lot of currency. When you level up and run out of contracts, talk to Wakano and get more contracts, de-level using a Book of Regression, which will refresh Wakano's inventory with more contracts. While the strat was most likely done for a while, it gained a lot more attention after a big controversy in 3.19 that I'll touch on in a later entry. But suffice to say, it felt mandatory to do this method to start gaining funds. But this strat was recently killed off in 3.21, with the Book of Regression no longer craftable, reverting back to doing heist as intended. Dev check. During the Q&A segments of League reveals, whenever Chris Wilson is presented with a question that needs clarification, he turns his head and asks a dev on standby for his or her input. This became a regular thing to expect in the Q&As that a third-party Twitch emote was made as a fun meme in the community. And Chris is definitely in on the joke since it knows it just makes everyone smile. Slams. This one has a few definitions. The first one is referring to an enemy whose attack move has a big wind-up and unleashes it all at once, resulting in huge damage or even one-shotting you. Examples include the previously mentioned Dominus with his Touch of God move, and the Pinnacle Boss Shaper with his Teleport Slam move. The second definition is with the Exalted Orb, where you Exalt Slam on an item in the hopes of getting a good modifier, likely to finish up your item. And lastly, Slam is a subset of melee skill gems with the Slam tag, like Ground Slam, Ice Crash, and Volcanic Fissure for example.
Still sane, Exile?
Build bait. Some players would like to take the easy road and find the build that can do all the content and would likely stumble upon videos or forum posts promising that ideal build, showing the DPS and gameplay to back it up. But when the player takes on that build, it performs less than intended and thus the build was bait. Now, on the one hand, it is really bad when the guide creator deliberately makes builds that doesn't live up to the hype, just for the sake of clicks. Or worse, forward you to a sketchy website. Build bait has become so ridiculous that Captain Lance created a parody series judging League stars as bait or no bait. On the other hand, you should take builds with a grain of salt and do your homework to confirm if it's viable. Look into how the damage calculation works, see if it can run on basic gear, do some leveling practice to get a feel for it. Part of the fun in Path of Exile is to experiment, and seeing one person's guide on a build is like the first few pages of a book, while the rest is to be written by you through your experience and knowledge. Minecraft Unique Bow. Did you know that Marcus Notch Persson, the creator of Minecraft, actually supported Path of Exile in closed beta? As such, he was given the opportunity to create a new unique item to the game, and what we got is a bow called Infractum. The name Infractum is an anagram of the title Minecraft, and the flavor text makes use of Marcus's name and alias. Mark us with mercy, then press on with care, execute us steadily, notch, away at our despair. I know I'm cringing too. Ultimatum returning. Something that has been pondered about for a while is that when will Ultimatum be returning? Initially, Ultimatum hasn't gone core because of the combat being overwhelming and not so tactical, and the rewards being more about mixture of the main rewards and item fountain, and less on just the main rewards. In nearly every Q&A segment with Ziggy D and Chris since 3.14 that mentions any news on Ultimatum, there is a plan to bring the main mechanic back that is in line with tactical gameplay, much like what we saw with the recent Path of Exile 2 gameplay. With the way the gameplay is done with thought and care in the movement and attack options, Ultimatum sounds like a fitting candidate for a PoE 2 league actually. But if you're sad with that being a possibility, we did at least get the Trial Master fight as part of a unique map. But one day, the Trial Master will return to taunt us once again. 2B Hideout. For those that enjoy your waifus, you know that 2B is the main character of the game Nier Automata. So what do you get when players spend too much time in their hideout? They draw. And if you happen to be training with someone or watching a streamer, you might have seen this image of 2B in a rather spicy pose. And it's all thanks to Quantum Fox on hideoutshowcase.com. Neat. PoE Toucan. This is referring to the classic piece of ASCII art called Le Toucan that is often spammed in Twitch chat as a copypasta. It eventually made its way into Path of Exile of the copypasta being spammed in global chat, and players would sometimes respond back by praising it. Since of course GOG needs to keep things regulated, it eventually made it impossible by limiting characters associated with ASCII art to be typed in, and thus no more Toucan. But it did leave a bit of an impact on the community to the point of becoming the unofficial series mascot. The Feared. This is an appropriately named encounter I myself have yet to do, and for good reason. It's hard. The Feared is a special Maven's invitation where you have the Maven observe the following bosses: Venarius in the Cortex map, Chiula, Uber Zeri, the Shaper, and the Elder. Upon finding the correct invitation, you are challenged to fight all of these bosses, potentially all at once if you're not quick enough or unlucky. I don't know if anyone can attest that the Feared is the hardest challenge compared to Uber bosses of any kind, because this just fries my brain. On-death effects. There's a number of on-death effects in this game that you need to be on your toes for. Don't always assume that once the enemy is dead that you're safe, because there could be a modifier or something inherent to the enemy itself. For example, Porcupine Goliaths shoot spines on death, dealing physical damage. So unless you have armor, don't stand in the pack when you kill them. For modifiers, there exists the 3 elemental ailment types: shocked, burning, and chilled ground on death, lightning, flame, and frost beacons on death, exploding chaos crystals on death, caustic orbs on death. Okay, I think you got the point. Crangled. If there was ever an image that would best summarize the complexity of this game, this would be it. Posted on the PoE Reddit by Izzy on April 15th, 2020, we have this mock-up of a resonator that has such lengthy, incoherent detail that is just beautiful, and it ends with the word crangled. From there, it stuck and became the alternative word for corrupted items. The term became even more prominent when Scourge League was released, as the use of the Blood Crucible and tainted currency was just the Crangling League. Triskai Decaphobia. Boy, that's a word. Anyways, this here is a divination card where upon completing the set will net you a corrupted tier 13 map at 13% quality with all 8 modifiers at 100% delirium. So what's odd about this one? Well, it's the fact that the name of this card is an actual phobia, which is the fear of the number 13, hence why the map tier and quality is 13, with delirium representing the fear part. To be fair, the number 13 is considered to be unlucky. So where does it drop? Tier 13 maps. Man, I love these joke div cards. Removed leagues. As Path of Exile continues to grow and innovate, there are bound to be pieces of content that no longer fits the mold. In this case would be 2 of the most recent examples, Parandus and Prophecy. In Parandus, you encountered secret caches protected by mobs which contained Parandus coins, which can then be traded with Kadiro Parandus for various offers. In Prophecy, you collect a new currency called Silver Coins, where upon right-clicking it, activates a prophecy which enables certain scenarios to occur, like entering a map with 6 strongboxes, upgrading uniques from killing specific bosses, or using a single orb of fusing to get a 6th link. While some parts of the leagues were interesting and useful, the overall content didn't match up with modern standards of league quality or rewards, and thus were sadly removed. But the NPCs did get a second chance to exist. Kadira was made to be an exclusive MTX from the Gemling Supporter Pack, and Navali returns in the up-and-coming Trial of the Ancestors League. What a comeback! Bots and RMT. Any kind of game that involves the generation and transaction of digital goods, there are bound to be bots and real money trading, and Path of Exile is no exception. Now, I'm far from being an economic expert, so I can only give my thoughts from a moral standpoint. Obviously, both cases are bad, but RMT is the worst one because of the risk of being scammed, personal information getting stolen, or getting your account banned. Bots, on the other hand, is in a weird gray area, as a lot of trades, particularly with consumable trades, are the lubricant of the economy because nobody wants to stand in their hideout, private messaging over 100 players to trade for divine orbs, and removing all the bots would just raise the private messaging even higher. Now, at the very least, Chris stated that he does go after the RMTers by finding their network and pulling the plug on their operation, killing those bots in particular. While he does hate bots in general, he understands the convenience it brings to players with consumable trading, and solving this issue is far from easy. Ritualist Hideout. In Echoes of the Atlas, the very top MTX that can be earned, aside from trophy pieces, was the Ritualist Hideout. themed after the League mechanic that was bundled with the Atlas expansion. This is so far the only hideout in the game that can be earned through completing challenges. Personally, I like this hideout not just because I own it and got the bragging rights, but because it was back when I was recovering from ankle surgery and all I can do is just play Path of Exile to spend the time. Fighting the Maven was actually the very last challenge I needed to complete to earn that hideout, and that victory felt so good. Circle Leagues. For a brief period, we saw a trend with a few leagues back-to-back with Ritual, Ultimatum, and a little bit of Expedition, that being the league mechanic involves circles in some way. In Ritual, you had to stay inside of a circle to fight mobs. The same can be said for Ultimatum, but stepping out of the circle for too long will make you lose your stuff. In Expedition, you had to place circular explosives. I don't know if any other players pointed this out, but I certainly noticed, and I'll always think of those leagues as circle leagues. 6 portal defense. This is a phrase to describe a player that lacks the proper defensive layers and only use the 6 available portals in the endgame to persevere through maps. In my opinion, doing this unironically is something I don't like, as it encourages a reckless playstyle. With every time you die in the endgame, you lose 10% of your current XP. Typically from levels 70 to 90, if you're decent with some defensive layers, it can still be a net gain in levels. But once you've reached 90 and intend to go for at least 95, then you gotta play it carefully, and this 6 portal defense thing ain't cutting it anymore. For all I know, this has probably got reduced to being a joke as actual defenses became more mandatory. I personally don't like dying, so it's probably just my own bias saying don't do the 6 portal only thing. It's stupid. Creator builds are meta builds. If someone is well known in the PoE community and has created build guides, then it's a high chance the build will be more played than others. Generally, when a build is meta, the acquisition of items for it would be more costly. The day 1 example in Crucible League will show the Elementalist in the top position with Fire Trap in their 5 link, uses Frost Blink, and the unique item, Eye of Malice. All of this point towards Subtractum in his videos covering Fire Trap Elementalist. Now, doing meta builds isn't always a bad thing, especially if it's for less experienced players. But for players that are more knowledgeable, would experiment with lesser known but effective builds prior to league start to get an advantage in trading for cheaper items. 3.13 was the best league. This is ultimately a subjective piece, and it depends on who you ask which league was the best one you've experienced. For me and many others, 3.13 was the big one. It introduced the expansion to the endgame with Echoes of the Atlas, where you can fight up to 10 map bosses at once, fight really tough boss combinations like the Feared as previously mentioned, and fight the Maven herself. The Atlas itself got passive trees for each region, which served as a foundation for what will become the big Atlas tree in Siege of the Atlas. There was also the Ritual mechanic, new maps, new skills, reworked ascendancies, Heist going core, and most notably, Harvest going core. This last one was the key thing that most players remember it for because of the player agency Harvest provided. It made it really easy to deterministically craft your gear, making it possible for once dead builds gaining a second life, and the build variety was nuts. But as history taught us, good things must come to an end, as I'll explain in a later entry. Attribute stacking. This is a build archetype that focuses on gaining as much relevant attribute points as possible to maximize damage. These builds require an additional stat per X attribute modifier on mainly items but sometimes elsewhere. For example, a dexterity stacking build will involve the unique item Fractal Thoughts, where stacking dex will give you increased elemental damage. For strength, Brutus's Lead Sprinkler will give you flat fire attacks per 10 strength. And for intelligence, the Whispering Ice not only does increase spell damage per 10 intelligence, but the Ice Storm skill does 5 to 7 base cold damage per 10 intelligence. There are more items that goes into this archetype, so go and explore if this interests you. Dark Souls Easter Egg. Upon entering the ridge in Act 6, nearby you'll see a unlit bonfire with a sword in it, resembling the same bonfire in Dark Souls. If you wanted to, you can add the same bonfire to your hideout, which is labeled Ashen Bonfire. And within the same area, you'll encounter dread wheels which look similar to bone wheels in the Dark Souls series. It's likely GGG is no stranger to the Souls series, as the recent PoE 2 gameplay seems to be inspired by it, with its meaningful movement and decisive attack options. Whether or not you like the idea, we'll have to wait and see next year to see how it pans out. Tencent. Tencent is one of the largest tech giants in the world based in Shenzhen, China. They focus on internet-related services and products, entertainment, AI, and so on. Tencent is also the world's largest video game vendor, with one example of subsidiaries that they own being Riot Games, the company that owns League of Legends. As a heads up, I don't like to engage with anything political or certain business practices, but as far as what I've seen is that Tencent does have a history of accusations going against it, namely for its anti-competitive monopolistic business strategies and having ties to the Chinese government. So it became a shock to people when, on May 20th, 2018, Chris made a post stating that Tencent now has major ownership of Grinding Gear Games, along with answering potential questions that users might ask. In short, Tencent claims to be hands-off and GGG continues to run independently, as further reinforced in a Bayclast interview during 3.15.
And as I'm sure you have seen by now, Tencent does not have any desire to exert any kind of control over the direction of the game, right? There has not been a single phone call going, hey, what happened with 3.15, right? Like, that's on me to work out. It's essentially still my company as far as the authority of running it goes.
The only difference being is that the Chinese version of Path of Exile will have some exclusive features per request of Tencent, some of which I'll share about in a later entry. Battle Royale. Fittingly, on April 1st, 2018, GGG released for a couple of days a game mode simply called Royale, where players fought for items, experience, and survival on a shrinking island. This April Fool's event turned out surprisingly well that they brought it back starting at Expedition League and stuck around every weekend all the way up through Scourge League. Winners of the Royale game mode would receive an exclusive hideout decoration of Aroa Feast, with additional wins upgrading the decoration. While Royale games aren't my cup of tea, it's cool that the developers played in on the joke and made a functional game mode. Then again, they've tackled League mechanics that have different game genres attached to them, so seeing them doing a Royale mode should come to no surprise.
This is the key to a crucible that stretches the sanity of the mind.
Olmec's Sanctum. This one is my personal favorite. One of the unique maps that you'll come across in the endgame is called Olmec's Sanctum. In the map, there are 4 paths, each representing one of 3 elements, as well as chaos. At the end of each path, you'll fight the boss of that said damage type. Upon defeat, you collect the object and move on to the next. After all 4 is complete, you return to the center to fight Olmec, the All-Stone, which does all 4 types of damage with higher level items as rewards. This whole map is a reference to the 90s Nickelodeon game show Legends of the Hidden Temple. The final boss is named after the Talking Stonehead character of the same name. The silver monkey pieces that you collect are the same pieces the contestants assemble to advance in the temple run, and the flavor text of the map makes reference to the show's 6 teams along with the title drop. This was one of my favorite shows growing up, and seeing this being referenced here just puts a gigantic smile on my face. So to the supporter that created this, TPAP157, you have great taste in game shows. Aurabots. This is another build archetype that's definitely more niche and sometimes infamous depending on how you look at it. Aurabots are simply support builds that focuses on auras with scaling aura effect and mana reservation to squeeze out max potential to buff your party. This cannot be played solo as you basically deal no damage. It should be played with at least one other person. Originally, the mana reservation system made it very easy to add a lot of auras at high investment, which I don't know what the math was like back then, but the new system as of version 3.16 made it so that investing into reservation efficiency has diminishing returns. Top players get less and average players get more. Alongside it, there were changes to sources of increased aura effect to where Aurabots are now in a more healthy state. That and GGG introduced Link Gems, which, who really uses those things? Betrayal League Allegory. In version 3.5, we were given the Betrayal League where we uncover and take down a mysterious group known as the Immortal Syndicate. Some of those members were originally NPCs that served as masters to complete daily missions or random encounters. It's like in the past, we were helping them to gain power in a sense. But when 3.5 came along, they betrayed us. Funny thing, this isn't the allegory I was building up to. This instead has to do with Diablo Immortal. When Diablo Immortal was announced on November 2nd, 2018, the fans were appropriately disappointed with the news that it would be mobile only at the time. But then GGG swooped right in 11 days later, dropping a trailer for the next league. And what was it called? Betrayal. Because Blizzard has betrayed the fans and GGG decided to be savage about it and welcomed the Diablo refugees with open arms. Now, I don't know if any of this was coincidence, but if the inclusion of the line Einhar said about not having nets mean anything, because that line was included in the same update, then GGG likely did last-minute changes to reflect the situation and win over a new audience. Maybe the league was originally called Immortal Syndicate, but who knows? Either way, it was a massive W for GGG, and I couldn't be any more proud. Ascendancy skills to keystones. Reworks are often needed as Path of Exile develops, one aspect being the rework of ascendancies. In some cases, what was originally part of the Ascendancy skill tree now becomes more accessible to other classes as a keystone. One example is Wicked Ward, which once belonged to the Occultist Ascendancy. Other examples include Versatile Combatant, which once belonged to the Gladiator, and Ghost Dance, which once belonged to the Trickster. There are probably more keystones that I'm not aware of that was originally an Ascendancy skill, but that does make me wonder what I missed out on earlier versions for Ascendancies. Cartographer's Seal. This is a former currency that was used on the Atlas of Worlds to uncomplete a map. But why would you do that? Don't you want to have full completion? Well, generally the more maps you complete, the more maps are added to the drop pool, thus diluting the maps you would like to play more of. With the seals, you can omit certain maps and increase the likelihood of your preferred maps. This was made through a vendor recipe using 3 sextants of one color and an orb of scouring to make either an apprentice, journeyman, or master seal, which works on white, yellow, and red maps respectively. But now that the Atlas progression has changed, now we have the favored map system where you can select your favorite map or maps and it'll get a 10 times multiplier for each slot up to 12 for potentially a 120 times multiplier. I definitely like the latter system better, just because my slight completionist side of me would go crazy otherwise. Brother Laz. For those that played modded Diablo 2, chances are you've heard of Brother Laz, the creator of the Median Excel mod. Well, you'll be happy to know that due to his talent and hard work, he was graced with an email one day from Grinding Gear Games to do freelance work in creating unique items for the game. And he said yes. Some of the items he designed includes Cloak of Flame, Bramblejack, Abyssus, Foxshade, Facebreakers, Dead Bell, and many more. If you happen to be a fan of the Median Excel mod, then you'll be happy to know that he is back at it again with having to mod Diablo 2 Resurrected with a new overhaul mod called Brotherhood. Hopefully it'll turn out good when it comes out.
I don't like it. It's shit.
During 3.19 Calandra League, one of the balance changes in the patch notes addresses minions not having good item options. What they did to balance this was to lower minion base life and damage, but provide more ways for players to invest into minions on their own gear, allowing minion damage and survivability to be higher than previously possible for a character with strong items. Gassy TV, however, the minion expert of the PoE community, says otherwise. In a video discussing the changes in Calandra League, Gassy raised a point about enemies doing too much damage, and it wasn't because of the Arch Nemesis mods. He laid out the stats for his Animate Guardians, Bob the First and Bob the Second, showing which enemies that killed them. A Tier 16 Harbinger and Tier 16 Tool Creeping Avalanche, both with 0 damage mods. Gassy has pushed the Guardians to their limits with defenses and yet still died to them. Because of this is what he had to say.
This is not okay. And I reached out to GGG raising my concerns before the league launched about things like this. And the answer I received was that it's been play tested, it felt fine for us. You should just, I don't know what to say, you should try it out in when league launches and see how it feels. Well, tell you what, I have play tested it. I have tested it and I don't like it. I don't like it. It's shit.
Such simple and powerful words that really brings us to question, did GG really playtest this? Well, more like an oversight. There was a follow-up video on minion defense, that being the first Guardian didn't have Bone Offering, which was a my bad for Gazzy, but the second Guardian died because Tool didn't have a hidden damage penalty against minions, which is a modifier that exists on some other endgame bosses prior to this. As such, GGG did a follow-up patch to apply the proper balance so minions can live for another fight. Able Gamers Charity. This was a community charity event ran by Lighty and Slippery Jim during Ultimatum League to raise money for able gamers. Anybody was free to join, and the goal was to band together to collect all available unique items within the game within a week. And as such, nearly 2,200 players, including myself actually, partaken in this collaborative effort. What's interesting is that, for the most part, there was no economy for financial gain. It was purely trading what players need to progress further, thus getting the uniques faster. In the end, the charity managed to raise around $4,000 and the unique tab got around 950 uniques, give or take. Personally, I wasn't able to find any uniques that others haven't found already, but I did assist players with supplies that they needed. This was a lot of fun, and I would like to do another unique collecting event like this again in the future. Actually pay to win? Path of Exile's whole business model relies on microtransactions to fund the game, and none of these are technically needed to play, but there are some that give great quality of life. This mainly has to do with stash tabs. By default, if I'm remembering correctly, you start with 3 standard tabs, but those tabs are not public. You would have to upgrade them to premium to make them public, so you can list your items on the main PoE trade site. I mean, you could try to sell your items by word of mouth, but nobody does that. Then there's the other stash tabs that's meant to easily organize and consolidate your goods. If you don't want to pay for them, there is at least the folders and the affinity system that you could use. For cosmetic MTX, there's obviously no advantage to player power, but few have argued that some skill gem MTX have better visual clarity, but that's about it. Honestly, this is more pay for convenience rather than pay to win, and it all depends how much you want to dedicate yourself to this game. All of this is also subjective, so if you believe that paying for quality of life is pay to win, then I can't argue with that. Bad performance at League launch. When it comes to League launches, it can often come with a price of their servers being unable to handle the load. They do have a safeguard in place to queue players in, but even then, there can be screw-ups. The worst one from my experience would have to be from Ultimatum. I remember being around position 1500 in the queue. Normally, once they allow players in, it would take no more than a minute to get in. But for some reason, it took at least 5 minutes. And if there was trouble getting in, there will be trouble staying in. I swear, this League launch was putting me to the test because I got through Act 1 in 3 hours due to multiple disconnects and waiting in the queue. What's even more insulting is that there were points where I didn't even get to keep the loot because of rollbacks. I fought Mervel and got a Quicksilver flask, but the game rolled me back, so I didn't get to keep it. Yay! So why was this launch so bad? Simply put, it was a human error. So prior to a League launch, characters made in the previous League needed to be automatically set to standard because majority of players wouldn't be logged in between the last League ending and the new one starting. If that doesn't happen, then the player that logs in would have the old characters migrate right away. But because so many players were logging in that day, the on-demand migration of characters was adding up by a lot, and it tanked the servers really badly. But that wasn't the only thing that happened during that launch. There was another bad situation that I'll share about in a later entry. Talismans was actually decent. For a quick recap, Talisman originally came out in version 2.1 as its own league. You would kill monsters that would possess these talismans, collect them, and sacrifice them at a stone altar to upgrade their tiers, and even to fight a boss named Rigwald. While I personally wasn't there when Talisman was first introduced, I never saw a reason to pick up a talisman as the roles never seemed to interest me. But there was a point in time that it did grab my attention. During version 3.12 Heist League, talismans were now able to drop with higher tier modifiers on average, and with a random anointed notable. For once, it made talismans worth looking at and maybe even to sell them. But 2 leagues later at Ultimatum, while anointed notables were still there, talismans became bland again. Why? Well, Chris simply stated that it was overkill.
You what?
Now granted, we have new crafting options with the likes of Tainted Currency to mess with talismans. But who really does that? Exalted and Divine Switch. For years, the Exalted Orb has been ingrained into the mind of every player with how it gives that spike of dopamine when one of them drops. But in recent history, it's becoming this weird dopamine detox and then relearning of valuable drops because in 3.19 Calandra League, the new Exalted Orb is now the Divine Orb. Reason for the change in economic status was that the Exalted Orb had no easy vendor recipe for them, and they were often used for crafting meta mods. GGG would rather have the Divine Orb effect to be rarer so getting good rolls would matter more, and so that players can Exalt craft their items more frequently. So they changed the crafting meta mods that used to cost Exalted Orbs now cost Divine Orbs, and changed the 6-link vendor recipe to grant 20 Orbs of Fusings rather than a Divine Orb. Once again, I'm no economic expert and I feel indifferent to the change from that standpoint, but it feels so off to see an Exalted Orb drop, get quickly excited, and then immediately feel sad. I hate it! Eternal Orb. This was an earlier form of deterministic crafting up until version 2.0. The Eternal Orb creates an imprint of an item that can later be used to revert the item to the imprinted state. So if you made a mistake or get an undesired outcome, the imprint is your undo button basically. Nowadays we have a beast crafting recipe that can do imprints, but it only works on magic items, limiting imprints to a starting point of crafting rather than at any point. While the Eternal Orb can no longer drop almost everywhere, it can, however, drop in Ruthless mode now. But good luck getting your hands on that. Maelstrom of Chaos. Nowadays, this is one of the unique maps that you'll find in the endgame where you fight a different version of Merveil. But at one point, this was the endgame. Back in closed beta, when you completed Act 2 on Merciless difficulty, you talked to Aramir and you would gain access to a new area through the waypoint called the Maelstrom of Chaos, a high-level area that uses a random instance from the campaign as its base, like the beach or the forest. Keep in mind, there was only 2 acts at that time, so the selection was pretty limited. This type of endgame lasted for nearly a year until the new map system took its place, and the Maelstrom of Chaos itself soon became a map later on. Masters and Favors. In version 1.2, the Forsaken Masters expansion was released that featured a new slew of NPCs you'd encounter to do various missions to level them up and earn favor. Once level 3, you can claim a personalized hideout, invite masters to the hideout, and make use of favor points to buy decorations and make use of the crafting services they provided. Version 3.5 Betrayal League had a revamp of the masters, permanent hideout unlocks, and all crafting is done on one bench while finding recipes throughout the game. The system of earning favor still remained the same. And finally, in 3.16 Scourge League, the master level and favor systems have been removed entirely, allowing players to have full reign on creating their ideal hideout. Recounting from my experience, some of the master missions in the older versions was kinda bad, namely with Haku, and because of my playtime back then being so sporadic, I never actually got a hideout. But jumping forward after Betrayal League, doing missions definitely got better and I was playing a lot more, earning more favor than I could spend, which is probably why they later dropped the favor system and just let us go ham with our hideouts. Procurement. Procurement was an old companion tool in the earlier years of Path of Exile that pulls up stash tab and character info from the forums so you can price items and create shop threads very easily. You can also do advanced searches in your stash, find items for vendor recipes, and save item stats as an image. This tool also works with third-party sites for your items to be easily searched. Tools and websites such as this was the norm if it means to get a speedy trade. But a lot of this was eventually phased out when on November 2nd, 2017, Chris posted the Trade Manifesto explaining their philosophy on trading as well as launching their own trade site. Whether or not you agree with their philosophy, this was a step in the right direction with having the trade features from tools and community trade sites all consolidated and officially hosted on their site, along with adding more features down the line. Dodge. This used to be a common defensive layer among builds on the right side of the tree, where investing into dodge provides a chance to prevent damaging hits. This isn't to be confused with evasion, as that uses a entropy-based system, meaning that you'll eventually get hit. Dodge instead just goes by random chance. Evasion-based builds would almost always go for the keystones, acrobatics, and phase acrobatics that provide attack dodge and spell dodge respectively. But when 3.16 Scourge League came along, defenses got reworked with attack dodge being removed while buffing evasion rating. To go along with evasion is a new defensive layer called Spell Suppression, which gives a chance to half incoming spell damage. Ideally, of course, you want to cap the chance to 100% to always cut down on spell damage. But what about spell dodge? Well, that got reworked to the new Acrobatics keystone, where modifiers to chance to suppress spell damage instead applied to chance to dodge spell hits at 50% of their value, and maximum chance to dodge spell hits is 75%. I don't think I've seen anyone make use of this keystone since the change, but I personally think investing into guaranteed spell suppression seems more powerful and consistent. Kiwi. The kiwi is a unique flightless bird native to New Zealand with the body size of a chicken, short and stout legs, and a long beak. Since Grinding Gear Games is located in New Zealand, the kiwi is sure to get their image represented in Path of Exile. If you paid for closed beta access for at least $25, you'll get a kiwi pet along with access to the beta, shop points, other digital goods, and even physical goods at higher tiers. Regular kiwi starts at $25, then bronze at $50, silver at $100, gold at $250, and diamond at $1,000. There is also an albino kiwi pet, but it's only exclusive to a rogue exile and not available anywhere else. Personally, I have the regular kiwi, and it's such an adorable ball of feathers. Now that I think about it, there has been talk about there being a beta access for Path of Exile 2. Makes me wonder if those feathered friends would make a return for a limited time. The Conquerors are the players. Prior to the Conquerors of the Atlas expansion, the endgame objective in terms of bosses was to face the Elder, specifically in the Uber Elder fight with the Shaper. Once you are victorious, Zana proceeds to use the Cosmic Arcana to open up a portal and trap the Elder inside. In Conquerors of the Atlas, the story is retold with Zana being accompanied by a group of 5 exiles called the Elder Slayers, named Cirrus, El-Hazman, Feritania, Drox, and Baron. After the defeat of the Elder Slayers proceed to go back into the Atlas numerous times, becoming more and more powerful, just like us, the players. This is a brilliant piece of meta commentary from Grinding Gear Games, having our endgame addiction being perfectly encapsulated by the Elder Slayers, later referred to as the Conquerors of the Atlas. This Atlas expansion came in at the right time for me, as I joined back in the middle of Blight League, and when the trailer dropped showing off the Conquerors with what their addiction has become of them, GGG knew I would be doing the very same thing. Shared PoE 2 assets. Since both games are all built on the same engine, we have been getting slight improvements and foreshadowing with what PoE 2 is going to look like. After the first announcement of PoE 2, the first thing I noticed in the patch notes of Conquerors of the Atlas was Lion Eyes Watched has been visually updated and uses our latest rendering technology. It also mentions a bunch of skills receiving visual improvements, along with the statement that reads, "Continue to incrementally improve the sound, art, effects, and environments." Although this statement has been repeated ever since the days of closed beta, this now rings more true than ever, since the devs now have a large library of assets from PoE 2 to use for later updates, like the case of 3.13 Echoes of the Atlas. In this update, we were given 11 new maps to explore, a lot of them using new textures we've never seen yet, along with select new bosses. Even in more recent leagues, like the Forbidden Sanctum, we've seen promos of this candle monster named Varakath, the Waxen, that has been reused from PoE 2 gameplay featured at ExileCon 2019 of similar design, called Candlemass. Now that it has been announced that both games will be separate, there still might be some shared assets of PoE 2, but things like the character model overhauls unfortunately won't happen. So PoE 1 characters will continue to run like they have a stick up their butt.
The
fires of 1,000 suns.
Arch Nemesis overtuning. Arch Nemesis feels like an anime arc with how ridiculous the implementation was. But how did this all go? Well, in patch 3.18, Sentinel League, Arch Nemesis went core to replace the old modifiers on magic and rare monsters. The problem, it was way too threatening, even in Act 1. The wrong combination of mods could take way too long to kill or even brick certain builds, forcing you to skip the monster. And we don't like skipping monsters. Naturally, there were patches within the first hours of the launch and even in the following days to nerf the mods. Arch Nemesis tried to make a comeback in Calandra League with not only another rebalancing, but to make the rewards for killing them more meaningful and abusable. The problem now was specific rewards were tied to specific mods, and if you got the right combination or at least one of them, you might get stacks of Divine Orbs. So to really take full advantage of it, you would need to hire a Magic Fire to do the final blow to maximize profits. Like, what? Arch Nemesis monsters now became synonymous to loot goblins. And we do not want that comparison. Oh, and the mods were still bad. Thus, ultimately, in Sanctum League, the modifiers now resemble what was similar to the old system, but with much more up-to-date content and balance, and the notable rewards are now hidden and random, eliminating the need to do any annoying actions to maximize rewards. Needless to say, this will be a story to tell to our grandchildren. The Great Expedition nerf. This is not referring to the League mechanic of Expedition, as that piece of content is just fine. This has to do with what it was bundled with, probably the biggest wave of nerfs in the game's entire history, at least from what I experienced. In general, leading up to this league, there was an increase of power creep with each new league, and GGG had to stamp it out by decreasing player power through the following things. Many skills and support gems had their overall damage reduced by 20 to 40%, the mana cost was harder to deal with, flasks got reworked a lot, movement got slower, Act 1 got tougher, ascendancy balance, etc. There were a lot of sweeping changes that it was just a huge meta shift, and it was difficult. A lot of this stirred the community so bad that Chris went on to 4 different podcasts to be interviewed. One on Allcraft, one on Bayclast, one with Zizaran and Mathel, and one with Gazzy, Grimro, and Crouching Tuna. This whole league was a wake-up call for everyone to better communicate with one another, and it did work out with later patches addressing defensive options, ailment mitigation, flasks further refined, aspirational content, endgame progression, and more. Thankfully, we didn't have nerfs to this magnitude since then. Only the usual amount of nerfs. Explodey Chest. In 3.9 Conquerors of the Atlas, we received 4 new influence types for items, each representing the Conquerors minus Cirrus. One of which I will talk about will be from Baron. On a piece of body armor with the Crusader's influence, one of the best modifiers you can roll is enemies you kill explode, dealing X% of their life as physical damage. This was a mod that can take almost any build and make it capable of doing screen-wide clears. I was lucky to get my hands on one in 3.13 as I was rocking a Bladefall Blade Blast Chieftain, and the pops felt so nice. Was it overpowered? Oh, you bet it was. So GGG nerfed it. Now instead of a guaranteed explosion, it's now a chance to explode that ranges from 11% to 35% and dealing 1/10 of their maximum life as physical damage. Since then, players have tried to fill the void with other sources of explosion, like Occultist with Profane Bloom, the Gladiator with Gratuitous Violence, and on unique items like Asenath's Gentle Touch. This mod can still likely work provided you have a good chance percentage and investing into generic AoE and physical damage using Herald of Ash and increasing mob density in your maps. PoE 2 will fix everything. This phrase was something that was uttered by the player base for the past few years before we knew that PoE 1 and 2 will be separate games. Prior to that announcement, players would often speculate what new features and improvements will take place. But the phrase PoE 2 will fix everything is more to address the common problems rather than genuine desire, and I can think of 3 examples. The first one I can think of is an alternative leveling system. With events like Endless Delve where players got to experience a different leveling scenario, now players want to have the option to skip the campaign entirely. But GGG is very much against it and would instead craft a much better campaign with having different side quests / objectives with every playthrough and having it being 6 acts. Next, there's the talk of Smart Loot or Loot 2.0 to make items on the ground to be less cluttered and more meaningful. While there has been subtle improvement with general decluttering like currency stacks, the improved loot was something they could just not nail down. For example, condensing 20 bad rares into 1 good rare. And as we found out at ExileCon 2023, itemization for PoE 2 is done much differently, and trying to bridge the gap between the two games would be almost impossible. And lastly, there is the state of trading, with the big one of streamlining the trading process. When having to deal with trading, you must disengage from whatever you're doing. Maps, bossing, heist, delving, you name it. If you don't, you'll lose out on the sale. Because of that, items at a low price, like 1 chaos for a unique, are just never sold. The price needs to be worth the seller's time to leave and engage in trading. Now there's definitely other problems with trading, like bots, armed tiers, scamming, price fixing, etc. But simplifying trading is what a lot of players want the most. The best example I've seen so far for a fix was in Subtractum's video, where you still have to use the trading window, but you can be in the middle of a map or boss fight and the game would just be paused while trading. It'll automatically pull the item and or currency from each respective trader's stash and send the goods to their stash upon agreement. Definitely give that video a watch to get more detail on this idea. In any case, it's kind of hard to say that PoE 2 will fix everything now that the games are separate. It'll likely come down to a matter of preference. Item Quantity Support Gem. Just from the name alone, you can already tell that this support gem is overpowered and can no longer drop, but it still can be traded for in Standard League. Having your character with increased quantity is the ideal stat to get more currency, as it's the only stat that matters. Item rarity would have no effect on currency, as that stat only affects items with tiers of rarity, like normal, magic, rare, or unique. With that knowledge in mind, it would get out of hand really quickly if this support gem was still dropping. But item rarity support still exists, and if you're lucky to find a rare monster with an arch nemesis reward type that converts dropped items to currency based on rarity, then there's your one way to get more currency. But again, the arch nemesis reward type is hidden and random, so I wouldn't rely on that. Infinite splits. Before version 3.14, splitting was a powerful method of basically duplicating items through the use of fractured fossils and beast crafting. What players would do to squeeze every drop of value in their maps was to craft things like a specific fractured mod, the area is influence, does not consume sextant uses, lots of delirium orbs, and high map quality. From there, you can just use a fractured fossil and essentially dupe the map, with the only difference being explicit modifiers were re-rolled. This was so incredibly powerful for the endgame juicers that when 3.14 came along, splitting was nerfed hard, where it cannot be applied to an enchanted item, a fractured item, a synthesized item, or influenced item. When the splitting works otherwise, both the master item and the copied item get the split tag, meaning they cannot be split again. Hot take? This was a change I'm actually okay with, because it was really unethical. Now the 0.1% has to juice maps like the rest of us. I guess. I don't know. I don't know what they exactly do. They're definitely not touching grass, I'll tell you that much. Harvest nerfs. Originally, harvest was a very tedious mechanic where you actually have to plant seeds, which then you harvest life force afterwards to be used for crafting. And the crafting options you were given was overpowered, like targeted nulls and exalts. So when harvest came back in 3.13, the tedium was gone, but the crafts were still there. And those crafts were not staying long term, because GGG knew they made a mistake. So in the next league, Ultimatum, harvest was nerfed to be more in line with Path of Exile's item philosophy, that items are hard to perfect. They also did it because other crafting options would be neglected if left untouched. Why use expensive basic currency when you got harvest? They now made harvest so that it was still usable for mid-game crafting, but end-game crafting was just gutted. Fast forward to 3.19 Calandra League, Harvest once again was reworked to have mobs drop crystallized life force so that it can be used later for crafting. This basically makes Harvest now tradable through formal means, as previously players would trade items to another to do crafting for them as a service, which was a risky thing to do in my opinion. But now that Harvest became more accessible, even more crafts were removed from the list, which included Reforged Keep Prefix / Suffix. Upon reflection, I just grew to accept the changes, but the other players do miss those powerful crafts as it was their gateway to more of the endgame. So all I can say now is, Paroshabi, your boss fight is garbage. Third-party reliance. Let me say this first. I greatly appreciate the people in the community that makes these great tools and websites. Path of Building, Awaken PoE Trade, Filterblade, and the like. But I do have to ask, does it bother you to use these things outside of the game? So what I mean by third-party reliance is that if you want to get a leg up in playing this game, you essentially have to alt-tab to look at another resource, which can play a factor in the player's enjoyment. Not familiar how to scale your damage? You look it up on the PoE wiki. Need to predetermine your passive skill tree route? You use Path of Building. Need to know what the meta looks like? You go to poe.ninja. The thing is, there are some aspects that are better off to be built into the game so the player doesn't have to change screens all the time. Awaken PoE Trade does give an overlay, and I guess technically the Steam overlay can work as well, but players would likely want to interact directly through the game itself in order to get their answers. Change the help section to have an index of terms that the player can search for and have a way to pre-plan the passive skill tree. I don't know how big of a concern it is to some players, as it personally doesn't bother me to use outside resources, but if it benefits the game greatly to improve the new player experience, with including those resources in-game, I say go for it. But maybe I'm wrong and I don't understand their vision. Foreshadowing. Backstab and Snipe skill gems. In early development of Path of Exile, there were 2 skill gems that didn't make the cut for public release, and those can still be found in the code: Backstab and Snipe. Snipe originally was going to work with frenzy charges to scale physical damage and attack speed. But Snipe did get a second chance as a modifier on the unique helmet, Asylum, and was changed to a channeling skill with a support component which gains stages to do more damage. And I'm guessing with how well the unique item served, the skill itself actually became its own skill gem in 3.21. Backstab, on the other hand, it's best that it didn't make the final cut because GGG thought of doing an actual backstab mechanic that would definitely not work well today. Maybe PoE 2, but definitely not 1. I personally think that the Nightblade support gem is the spiritual successor to Backstab, as gaining Elusive will give you a critical strike chance and multiplier bonus, like if you were sneaking and then landing a backstab. So in some way, shape, or form, old ideas can come back, much like this next entry. Relics predated jewels. Originally in Diablo 2, characters can gain passive bonuses through the use of charms sitting in the player's inventory. GGD wanted to do the same idea, but to have the bonuses elsewhere and out of the player's inventory, and eventually what they came up with was jewels that can be socketed in the passive skill tree. But GGG thought of a different idea before that, which involved relics. Players would kill monsters, find a rare relic drop, and then the player would take it to an altar for the bonuses to go into effect. If that sounds familiar, that's because in 3.20, the Forbidden Sanctum, they brought back the idea of relics for the League mechanic. Most of the relics that you would find will only apply its effects while you're in the Sanctum, with one exception: Sanctified relics. These are the ones that'll affect your character stats anywhere, just like how the original idea worked. And wouldn't you know it, the Forbidden Sanctum is now going core along with the relics. Except for Sanctified relics, as that'll need a balance pass first. Of course. Ranger is a lesbian. There are a few subtle clues in the lore that describes the Ranger as a lesbian. When venturing through Mervel's cavern, you'll come across these tempting spirits where they extend their arm out while stepping backwards and fading away, in an attempt to lure you in through your desires. Depending on the class you play, you will see the opposite gender of the spirits, For example, the Templar will have female spirits tempting him, and the Witch will have male spirits tempting her. The Ranger is the only class where the spirits are female, greatly implying that the Ranger is actually lesbian. There's also a notable voice line later in Act 2 when killing Alira, the Witch Bandit, where she says this:
I hate to pluck a pretty flower, even a poisonous one like you.
Even when the Ranger knew she had to kill Alira, she gave her a brief compliment. It's just these little things in storytelling that makes me appreciate it even more. The strange voice is Tang Maozu. In 3.10 Delirium League, we're introduced to a being called the Strange Voice, an unknown entity that messes with the player's mind when interacting with the Delirium mechanic. During the campaign from Act 5 and onwards, the Strange Voice would often comment about your environment and goals, some of which mentions about the gods you're going to slay, and he seems oddly knowledgeable about them, even saying he's related to Ralakesh.
Ralakesh. My brother has been busy, hasn't he?
So we can tell that the Strange Voice might be a god of some kind, but what kind of role does he play? Honestly, a big one. When talking to Sin in Act 8 about Lunaris, he mentions about a trickster by the name of Tang Maozu, who was responsible for tricking Solaris and Lunaris to fight against each other for many years. And what comment did the Strange Voice say when entering deep into the Lunaris temple?
It wasn't hard to turn them against each other. A little nudge here and there. That's all it took.
Now there are some other pieces of lore around Tang Maozu through flavor text of some unique items, but what we got here sounds pretty conclusive to me. The actual name of the Strange Voice is Tang Maozu, the main antagonist of Delirium. The last to die is Alva. In 3.16 Scourge League, we meet an NPC out on the coast who just escaped the Scourge from her dimension, fittingly named the Last to Die. She managed to escape thanks to an artifact called the Blood Crucible, created on a pact between Chaos and the High Priest of the Vaal. Luckily, she is the descendant of the Vaal Priest, thus able to use her life to sustain the Blood Crucible. Now, what is the case with Alva Valai, the Master Explorer from Incursion? Well, it's a given she likes to go on adventures and finding treasure, something that we, the players, can relate to. But what is more interesting is with her methods of finding treasure. She one day found a manual of Vaal blood thaumaturgy and kept it hidden for personal use. With it, along with you, the Exile, must travel to the past to alter and locate the Temple of Etzoatl, and she does this by activating these ancient waystones with the blood of the Vaal, which she happens to have inside her. It's also later confirmed in dialogue with the Atlas Memories content that she is a distant Vaal descendant.
That's no problem for me, since I'm distantly of Vaalish descent.
So Alva and the Last to Die are both descendants of the Vaal. They both make use of their blood to accomplish their goals, plus they're both voiced by the same voice actress. Now this isn't entirely conclusive as these characters have different upbringings. Alva's blood magic needs specific requirements to work and she mainly hunts for treasure. The Last to Die knows her blood magic really well to hop dimensions and to fight off the Scourge for a long time. I personally like this connection because of the whole what if scenario for Ray class and how events would play out. Streamer priority. Remember the story of the Ultimatum League launch I talked about earlier? Well, there's a part 2 to this. While the majority of us were waiting in queue or getting kicked and back into queue, it turns out some select people were able to jump the line and get ahead of everyone, and those were the streamers. Hey, wait a minute, I was streaming at that time, why didn't I get priority? I'm joking, by the way. What happened was GGG had arranged big streamers, like Shroud for example, to showcase Path of Exile to their viewers for money. But because of the servers having a meltdown from the collective character migrations, they panicked and turned on a whitelist of streamers to skip the queue, both paid and regular known streamers. GGG initially thought that viewers can just watch these streamers while they wait in queue, but quickly realized that that only made players angry that they couldn't get in and instead have to watch streamers get an advantage. When some of the streamers realized that they had priority, they immediately requested for the priority to be taken off just because the hatred from the viewers was getting out of hand. The worst example out of all of this was with Empyrean Gaming. He and his crew took the priority queue much for the same reason GGG initially thought. viewers can watch while they wait. That obviously didn't happen, and the hatred from the viewers was building up so much that when he was asked, "How is this fair?" he made an unfair comparison to unclean water in Africa to streamer priority. This was horrible wording on his part that his comment was clipped and reached top posts in the PoE subreddit. He did regret saying that, likely because it was a stressful situation, and he later made a donation of $1,000 to a charity that provides clean water to developing countries. But if you guys think he deserves it more, he and his crew did get banned for the league for exploiting a bug, so that works out. Now, I can understand having to allow paid streamers to get priority, as those streamers only had to play for like, what, 2 hours? It really wasn't going to make a big impact on the economy. But for regular streamers who has extensive knowledge of the game, that's a different story, and I'm glad they spoke up about it. I know this was a horrible situation GGG was in, but they learned their lesson, and we haven't had a bad league launch like this ever since. Labyrinth Jewel Stealer. Ever since the release of version 2.2 Ascendancy, there was a patch that added leaderboards to the Labyrinth that rotates daily. Whoever was the top player of the day, reaching the end of the Labyrinth per difficulty, would be rewarded with a unique jewel that can only be found in the Labyrinth. Now, what if I was to tell you that there was a stranglehold on these jewels? Enter Hammer, who has been lab running for 4 years and winning almost every single one. All the players have rightly grown suspicious of his victories to see what the heck was going on with this guy. Was he cheating or even RMTing? Well, it turns out he does have a history of bans that he did admit to, but neither was for cheating or RMTing. One was for account sharing, and another was for leaking data for the upcoming Blight Leak. Either way, his actions has painted him as a very infamous PoE player in the PoE subreddit. But his winning streak came to a close when in version 3.14 Ultimatum League, the unique jewels in the Labyrinth now only drop from Mozaro's treasure chests in the Eternal and Enriched Eternal Labyrinth. From there, Hammer decided to make a post in the subreddit detailing what he did to win using some kind of loading trick. Of course, most people responded with heavy skepticism given by his reputation. It did suck that no one else was able to get these jewels for 4 years, which is surprising that GGG didn't do anything about it sooner. But they did change it, and the fiasco is over. Now players can get their hands on those precious jewels. Path of Math banned. Path of Math was an avid content creator for Path of Exile that greatly focuses on high-end crafting, deep economy, and some build guides. He has built a sizable following to be featured on GGG's website a few times, from what I've heard from others, don't quote me on this, and to have sponsorships on his live streams. The problem, I think, starts here with his status, like he's an authority figure. So whenever his way of playing the game is threatened, he becomes quite toxic, and it has resulted him in multiple controversies and bans. Yes, he was banned more than once. He harassed a staff member, first ban, did giveaways to viewers of in-game items, which is actually labeled as RMT by GGG, as in you're trading items to viewers for their loyalty and potential donations, so second ban. Shilling himself on Reddit using sock puppet accounts, Reddit ban, and now the third and current ban where he has a temper tantrum on stream calling Chris Wilson a bald R-word. His tantrum in this case was from the changes in 3.19 Calandra League, mainly concerned about crafting and the economy, and this whole thing blew up and crumbled down right in front of him because of his actions. Since then, he has stopped streaming and his video uploads became sparse, even saying that he is focusing more on real life stuff for the sake of his health, which is definitely the best choice for him. Stealth item drop nerf. In relation to 3.19 Calandra League, we talked about the Arch Nemesis overtuning and rewards, we talked about the Harvest nerfs, we talked about the Exalts and Divine Switch, and we talked about the minion nerfs. What else is there to cover? Well, probably the worst thing out of all of this was a stealth nerf to item drops. Yes, that one thing that we players want out of our RPGs is loot, and if there is less loot, we'd riot. Okay, to back up a bit, what started this was that the big party juicers like Empyrean Gaming and his crew had noticed that there was notably less loot. To confirm this, they did a comparison with the loot drops in previous leagues. and it definitely stood out. So if high-end players were having issues, then the rest of us will have issues. And indeed we did. We resorted to league mechanics that weren't affected by drop rates from monsters like Expedition and especially Heist, which is why Infinite Heist was catching steam. So what did GGD do exactly? What they did was two things, and I quote, "The first is that the rate of encountering rare monsters from certain league content has been reduced, so you are fighting, killing, and receiving rewards from fewer monsters than before. This is partially offset by rare monsters in 3.19 now being more rewarding than they were before. The mods add more item quantity and rarity than before, and then there's the reward conversion system used for the more dangerous mods. The second reason is that we removed a massive historic bonus to item quantity and or rarity that applied to some league-specific monsters. We replaced it with a moderate 2 to 3 times increase to item quality to offset the fact that they often have more life than regular monsters and some cannot drop maps." Now they did do a thorough look into the drop rates from anywhere else that might have caused a change, and they later dropped a patch to improving rarity on rares and bosses, increasing the unique drop rate by 33% and increasing the base drop rate of currency items by 25%. It's good that they responded and tried to fix the issue, but the thing is that they still didn't tell us ahead of time. Chris later made a post named "What Happened with Items," where he explained that there was a human error for the person forgetting to include this in the patch notes, and for Chris for not noticing it while proofreading it. Prior to proofreading it, this change was mentioned to him in passing, but didn't press further on the matter because he was so busy at the time. He definitely would have been better prepared if he knew the consequences. He definitely felt bad with the way things have transpired and didn't want to disappoint the player base. But as always, he was willing to admit his mistakes and take full responsibility. Whether or not that you agree with all of this is up to you. For me, well, I'm still playing it, just learning to adapt and making the best of it. Path of Exile inspiration in old school RuneScape. I find it really cool when a company is popping off quite well with their IPs that it becomes a source of inspiration for other companies, and that is the case with Jagex. In November 14th, 2019, Jagex launched their first iteration of old school RuneScape leagues. The general objective is that you start with a new character separate from the main game with certain restrictions to complete as many tasks as possible to earn points. The points can then be used to purchase cosmetic rewards, and total points will determine what trophy you'll earn. It was cited in the Gielinor Gazette February 2020 that the idea of doing leagues of their own was because of Path of Exile and Diablo. But the inspiration didn't stop there. 2 years later, in another Gielinor Gazette, the old school team did what was called a game jam, where they brainstormed and showcased a bunch of concepts. One of which was the Tossicall Trials, a wave-based challenge to earn loot, but with a price. For every wave you complete, you can either leave with the loot you got, or risk it all for more. And if that idea screams ultimatum, you be correct, as they were heavily inspired by that league mechanic. Sadly, we haven't heard any news of its inclusion to old school RuneScape, but it's still awesome that they cited Path of Exile for their ideas. Chinese-only features. As a follow-up from the Tencent entry, we do have the Chinese version of Path of Exile, which has some exclusive features, some of which that makes us question, why isn't this in the international release? Well, let's go down the list. First example would be auto pickup pets. There are two versions from what I found, a magic one that picks up all types of currency, and a rare one where you can filter which ones to pick up for 90 days, then it becomes magic. Next would be a passive tree planner, where you can highlight which nodes to take ahead of time. How about an actual in-game market? Open a side tab to see the market, do a basic search for the item, put the currency in, hit accept, wait for a response, and boom, a very quick trade. Granted, if you still need to find something more specific, you still need to use the PoE trade site. Other examples include a death log, better rewards from quests, one button trigger to activate more than one flask, backpack MTX to expand your inventory for only one league, a built-in browser with game information, and a bunch of other differences. I do recommend researching the differences as it paints a much different picture with how Tencent wants to run the Chinese version. Definitely more blatant examples of pay to win, that's for sure. But I do think we can learn from this and implement some features to the international release. I do think an in-game browser is needed, just for the sake of reducing alt-tabbing to another window. The passive tree planter is another thing the game could benefit. Even just a basic one will suffice. But some of the more questionable ones like the looting pets and even an in-game market should be avoided, which is crazy for me to say because I wanted trading fixes. GGG doesn't want to go down the slippery slope as they want to retain the difficulty and friction where appropriate, so when you overcome it, you learn and feel rewarded. If you want to start getting deep into what should the game be like, then let me introduce you to the final entry of this iceberg. I personally put this entry at the very bottom for a good reason, as this encapsulates so much about the game, the company, and the player base as a whole. To explain what the vision is, it's a term coined by the player base to describe the direction of Path of Exile in a negative way. Typically when patch notes roll out and the changes conflict with players or it doesn't address the player's feedback, it's just then assumed that it's more what the company wants and not what the player base wants. Hence why players call it the vision out of disappointment. This is very problematic because it's a game that I love and yet it's true sometimes. A lot of the earlier entries that I detailed can be seen as GGG just following their vision and not thinking about what the majority wants. But that can't be true. Regarding the outcome of 3.15 Expedition League, Chris went on a total of 4 interviews, gaining perspectives from different creators, understanding their concerns, and forwarding it to the rest of the team. At the same time, he stays very firm about his philosophies and reinforces it almost every chance he gets. I get it that it's annoying to hear the word philosophy and its variations from Chris, but he does this because he has immense belief in this game. He knows that if he lets his guard down for what he stands for, the rewarding feeling of progression, conquering the challenges, and living the ultimate power fantasy will start to lose its meaning. Sometimes it takes a good long look to get a firm grip on where GGG is heading for Path of Exile. When I was rewatching the interviews, I started to see a different perspective. Before, I was with the content creators, eager to hear the answers to have our desires satisfied right away. Now, I'm more with Chris, playing the long game to see the bigger picture. I think that when we are so blindsided with hype and immediate changes, we react more selfishly, to be honest. How dare GGG ruin their own game? Do they not care about the player base? Look, I've been there, I huffed a bunch of copium, yada yada yada. But when it reaches the 2nd or 3rd month of the league, it's a moment of reflection. Did GGG make the right call? Did they communicate with us? Are they doing what is really best for the players? For Path of Exile to be innovating so many ideas compared to other ARPGs, they're bound to have a lot of missteps and reworks. For example, Synthesis League had an interesting idea to it, but poor execution. Instead, we got fractured and synthesized items and the bosses from the league as unique maps in the base game. This has always been a constantly updated game that reflects on the decisions of GGG and player feedback. Yes, our voices do matter. They do make adjustments in response to critical feedback. They do explain in detail and apologize when things go seriously wrong. They're not perfect and can screw up, but they're willing to own up to it. Now, I am sounding like a GGG apologist right now, and I might just be, so if you want to label me as one, go right ahead. But I went through a lot of the ebb and flow of changes in recent years, and I felt all of that. I was hyped, I was disappointed, I was worried, and I was hopeful. I do disagree with some aspects of the game, but if it means to let it run its course leading up to something grandiose that players derisively call it the vision, then I'll still be playing. So if you're upset by GGG at any point in time and want to see their vision to be put to the ultimate test, then mark your calendar for Path of Exile 2 and judge it for yourself, and I shall do the same. But we got plenty of time. We got the 3.22 league that's coming out. and allow discussing to be had. I might even have another Path of Exile video right here on screen for you to watch. If not, then maybe this video here on Dusk. It does have Eldritch themes to it. That being said, thank you for watching, and I shall see you soon, well wishers.